So hi everyone, my name is Giorgio, and I'm going to be introducing on ZBrush. Uh, what is ZBrush? ZBrush is a powerful and advanced digital sculpting platform program. So essentially, and I'll get into this later, but there's two different types of modeling. You can do a sculpting modeling, which is kind of like a soft way of constructing a shape, or there's like more of the technical modeling, which is like architecture and things like with hard surfaces. And so this is what ZBrush is used for. It's used to sculpt. It's industry standard, meaning that uh, almost all game, movie, you name it, companies will use it to create their CGI characters and environment. And so as it stands, it's powerful enough to create a game-ready, game/movie ready mesh of any character or model that needs to appear in the game. And if you guys know anything about the structure of how game artists created or movie artists created, it's quite complicated. And so this really is a very powerful program, and I'll get into that why it is. And so before I begin, here's the difference between sculpting and hard modeling. Hard modeling with programs such as Blender, Maya, 3D Max, all use specific sets of tools that allow for large sets of patterns and strict surface construction, meaning that it's like it's hard surface. So I mean, you can see in the picture down here that a table would be much easier to make if you just extruded a square out rather than take clay and just piece it all together. It's much easier. And so programs, again, such as Blender, Maya, 3D Max, excel at these types of things because the way they use the computer allows you to create a very technical approach towards the game art. And again, so yeah, the computer, all the power comes from creating arrays, meaning that it's essentially a bunch of small like patterns, all for example, so if you wanted like a square with a certain detail on it, you could multiply it multiple times to create that same thing and essentially create a whole new world based off of only a few primitive shapes and things like that. And sculpting, on the other hand, as you can see in the picture, it's quite obvious that shapes are much more organic. It's used to create humans, animals, plants, and monsters. It's quite creatively orientated compared to the technically orientated hard modeling because it does depend on using pens. And it's almost like, think about it as real clay, essentially. So you're going to be adding material. You're going to be taking away material. You're going to be smoothing things out. You're going to be creating creases and everything like that. And that's all handmade. And so it is essentially art. It's almost like a drawing. This is a different form of art, which is why a lot of 3D artists in the industry know also how to draw. It's generally more laborious, again, because you have to be the one that creates the individual details, while a computer, when you're hard modeling, can create random displacements and designs based off of computer algorithms. But here, it's all based around a mesh and how that mesh interacts with the object next to it. And example programs for that would be ZBrush, Blender, Mudbox, Sculptris Pro, and Cinema 4D. And so multiple, from the previous slide, you can see that there's multiple options of ZBrush. And so I just wanted to get into why ZBrush specifically is used so often. So essentially, it's capable of manipulating models with a poly count of 20 million, which essentially means there's more details. And here on the next slide, you can see the difference between a low poly model versus a high poly model. And so you can see here on the left, it's a high poly model, meaning that there's a lot of details and you can get much smaller things. But on here, you can see that there's a lot less details, but it creates a generally more even shape. And so having a high poly count available to you is important to create really detailed sculptures. And so that's essentially probably like the biggest reason why you'd want to get ZBrush, due to that powerful capability. On top of that, it has a large selection of workflows. And so a basic workflow essentially would be like getting a primitive shape, something that's easy to construct, manipulating it. And if you're working for a game, you'd want to retopologize it so it gets ready for animation. And so it has a cleaner surface, and you can actually see it here as well. One on the left has a very messy surface. And so imagine trying to animate that. It would be really difficult compared to animating that right side, because there's many more things, or many less things you have to control. And then another part of the workflow would be like coloring it, and then finally getting into the game as an asset. It has a large selection of brushes and tools that'll help you sculpt compared to any other program. It has maybe like 2 times the amount of brushes and tools available to the user, which means that you can have much more capable tools dedicated to specific tasks, meaning that they're much more powerful in that specific area. It works well with many other programs, such as Marvelous Designer, Substance Painter, and other rendering engines. And all those tools are used in AAA game assets and movies. And so it's important for a program that has to operate at such a high level. It's important that it works with these other programs as well. But the cons, which admittedly there are a few, especially for beginners. One of the cons is that there's a huge learning curve. The UI is not friendly whatsoever. It's unintuitive. It's hard to start actually getting into the creative workflow. You have to really focus on the controls and everything like that at first before you can actually start to get into it. And so you need to spend a lot of time with it before you can start making really, really good models. It's expensive, $900 for a perpetual license, which means essentially that you can have it forever for $900. But again, that's for non-business. And so you wouldn't be able to sell your models or use it for any type of profit. Or you can get the $40 per month version, which admittedly could be more expensive later down the line. There's little options for rendering, which is why it works so well with other rendering engines. But that, again, means that you have to buy those rendering engines, such as Arnold, which is Autodesk's renderer. There's also little options for coloring and shading. And so that's why you bring things like Marvelous Designer and Substance Painter, which both specify in creating details and clothing, for example, Marvelous Designer. So you can see from this list that it's very focused on the base model itself. And so that is essentially is what ZBrush is for in the industry. It's used to create a base model, and from there you export it to other programs where you can create clothing, you can create more details, you can color it, you can add textures and all of that. And so again, here's the high poly count versus low poly count detail, which is probably one of the most important things you'd need to learn at the start. And so here's some of the ZBrush alternatives, just in case maybe it was too expensive or the learning curve was too steep. So there's Blender, of course. It's free. It has a very intuitive UI, and it actually includes a lot of tools, not only sculpting. It has animation, hard modeling, sculpting. It has lighting capabilities and rendering tools. And so for a free program, it's quite powerful. But the problem with this is that it's not industry specific, or it's not industry standard, meaning that you won't see many people using it to work with games. And there's various other reasons for that, but that gets into specifics too much. There's also Mudbox, which is Autodesk's sculpting program. It's $10 per month, so definitely cheaper than ZBrush, and it works well with other programs in the Autodesk library, such as Arnold, 3D Max, and Maya. And so it's good for that, but not many people use it because ZBrush is such a better and more powerful tool. Okay, so you want to download ZBrush at this point. Where do you go? You can easily get it from the ZBrush store, or you can get it get the cheaper option, which is ZBrush Core, actually, which has many less tools, but it's a great place to start. And you would find all that information on pixelogic.com, the company that creates ZBrush. So you install the program, and probably the first thing I would do is watch the provided tutorial videos. And then so after you watch the tutorial videos, you'll be greeted essentially with this screen. This is the standard UI of ZBrush, and I'm going to go through it and just show you like the major key areas. So on the left, you'll see where it says standard. That's a whole bunch of brushes. And you can see here on the bottom right, these are a bunch of different brushes that do different things. And so, for example, the standard brush, it's a basic tool where you can add or remove layers quickly. But then there's a clay brush, for example, that creates much more organic features and things like that. And then you get alphas, which is essentially patterns. There's textures on the left side. And then some other options. Here on the right, though, this is where most of the menu scrolling is going to happen. And there's a lot of things that you could learn here, but aren't really required. I'll go through some of the things that you definitely do want to know. And then at the very top, you're going to have more editing tools, such as you can see here, the brush, which is this red circle. You can increase the intensity of it. You can increase the drawing size. So if you use any like program like Photoshop or any other drawing tool, it's going to be similar to that. And so from this, you can already see that it's very confusing. There's a lot of menus that you have to go through, but learning only maybe like 5 things will get you so far with this program that it's actually quite worth to learn. And the good thing about the ZBrush interface is that it's fully customizable, meaning that you can drag anything you see around here. And at the bottom here, you can actually see that the artist chose to move some like most used brushes at the bottom so he has quick access to it. And so these are essentially the most popular brushes: the move brush, then flake brush, the clay brush, and the clay buildup brush. And all of these do different things. For example, the move brush will just take the mesh and just pull it instead of adding or removing. And so it's super useful for creating shapes. And then here at the top right, sort of at like top middle right area, you can see active points and total points. And that's where you can see the poly count, meaning how many points there are on this mesh. And you can increase that, again, meaning more details. But it's harder to control eventually if you get too high too soon. And so that's the interface. And the basics of basic steps of ZBrush, probably what your general workflow would be to start with a primitive, which is a basic shape which the computer knows how to handle. The math is quite simple for calculating meshes and surfaces and like that. At the bottom left, you can see a multitude of those options. So essentially, they're very simple shapes. For example, a sphere, a cube, a plane, a cone, or a cylinder. And all those are simple meshes. The computer can make a lot of calculations, and you can change a lot of features without having too much of a hassle. So you'd start with a primitive, and then from there you'd start adding or removing details and shapes. And then from there you'd want to polish your model. Like right here, this is a very unpolished model. You can see the mesh squares on the surface. So what you want to do, you want to smooth it to something where it looks like the skull on the top right. You can see that it's quite reflective. It's quite smooth. And that's what creates a nice solid model. After that, you can either choose to use the in-program painter, which is called polypaint, which admittedly can be useful if you want to get rough ideas of where what your model is going to look like. Or you'd want to export it into another software such as Substance Painter, where you can get much more specific and accomplish much more. And then from there, you want to export it to another rendering software where it's essentially like Photoshop, if you want to think of it that way, where you can choose like the poses, you can choose lighting and all of that to make your final picture of your model look really, really clean. And so that's essentially what you'd go through. And then each of those steps has a lot of sub-steps, which you need to learn. And so that's where the intricacy of learning the program comes into. You need to know features of ZBrush. One is called Dynamesh, which means, which essentially in real time adds and removes poly details or poly count in specific areas in order to keep your mesh clean and easy to manipulate. And again, what I said before, you can, it's much easier to move and manipulate a model if it has a lower poly count. And the good thing about Dynamesh, that will choose specific areas that need more details and some areas that may need less. And so it always keeps a good balance. But the problem with Dynamesh would be that sometimes it tries to overwrite details. And so you wouldn't want to use it at later stages of your models where you have a lot of fine intricacies. Another is ZRemesher. It's the ZBrush. It's pixelogical. It's Pixelogic. It's a tool that they use in all of their software, where it recalculates the mesh to make it very clean. And so if I go back to the picture here, you can see how one on the right looks so much more cleaner than this on the left. And so what ZRemesher would do is takes all this information on the left side and then kind of smoothens it out. And so it looks cleaner to something similar to the picture on the right. And finally, a big tool is the dynamic subdivision. It will add and remove poly counts of the entire model instead of Dynamesh, where it only does specific ones or specific areas, depending on need. It will just add more features and details by changing the poly count. And so those are probably the most important features you will need to learn when learning ZBrush. And so admittedly, it can be very overwhelming, and it will take a while before you can get something that looks truly special, that looks truly good. But there's a lot of, it's definitely possible. A lot of people do it. And so some tips of success on your journey would be, don't get too overwhelmed by all those options. You only need to learn a few, especially these three. If you know these three and you know basic brushes and how to operate them, you'll do great. You can make amazing models just by that. And so it'll take time for you to learn all the features. And so you probably just want to learn whatever you need to know at that specific point. Another tip would be to stay focused. For example, if you want to create people, make sure to study human anatomy, because you need to know where the muscle groups are. You need to know how they look like. And it's similar, very similar to drawing. You need to know proportions. You need to know all the fundamental art aspects. And for creating people, you need to know how they look like, of course, and ways that you can manipulate them into something that you like. Modeling clothing, you need to learn cloth simulation and texturing, which ZBrush has just added in their latest version called ZBrush 2021. And that's essentially a gravity simulator, if you will. So it enacts like cloth folds and everything like that. So it looks actually like clothes wrinkling. Another tip would be to treat your model like an art piece. It really is. You have to train hard into making something look good. You have to repeat things over and over and over to make sure they look the best they can be. And if you treat it like an art, it'll reflect that in your final models later down the line. And probably the most important thing, and the thing that I struggled with the most, was don't compare your models to professionals. They have large teams behind them usually with a lot of their models. They spend more than 10 years learning specifically ZBrush, and so they're quite skilled at what they know. And if you compare to like the great things that they have done, you'll get demotivated very quickly. So you just have to remember that it's going to take a bit to learn, but it's definitely rewarding if you manage to make the time. And so if you want further information on how to learn ZBrush, these are great places to start learning how to do it. There's plenty of YouTubers. One person called Michael Pavlovich, he has a whole tutorial section on ZBrush, which is great. Raf Grassetti, which is an industry professional he worked with. I think it's called the Santa Monica Studios of Sony. So he worked on God of War, and he shares a lot of tips about industry. And then there's Flip Normals, which is a company, but they do a lot of amazing like tip videos. They make a lot of informative videos, super helpful. And then obviously the main company itself, they also have a YouTube channel where where you can see live streams of professionals doing their work. You can learn a lot from what they're doing. And then they also offer trailers, of course, for their new versions and everything like that. Some websites you can visit. You can visit ZBrush Guides, which has a whole panel on like specifics of the tools, every brush. They have everything you need there. But that isn't affiliated with Pixelogic. So if you want something that's affiliated with Pixelogic, you would go to the user guide of ZBrush, which does have a lot of information of how to get started and will definitely take you far. Some books is Introduction to ZBrush, the 3rd edition, Sculpting from the Imagination. And specifically, if you'd want to do Sculpt Humans, which ZBrush is quite popular for, you'd want to learn anatomy. So a great book for that would be Anatomy for 3D Artists, the Essential Guide for CG Professionals. And so my favorite artists are Raf Grassetti. Again, he's the person with the YouTube channel. He was an art director of God of War, Cuphead, and all these amazing games which have great art pieces. And I've linked everyone's portfolio essentially in here. So if you want to check out their work, it's all there. There's Hadi Karimi, which creates hyper-realistic art. He's a freelance artist, and so he creates people that actually look like people, which is quite crazy. I'll show you some pictures later on. It's crazy. Once you look at it, you'll understand where this hype is coming from, because it's quite amazing to see how far technology has come. And then another one is Luke Starkey. He creates horror and monster models. He's a freelance artist again. He makes some great stuff, really imaginative. If you want to get freaked out, just look at his page. And then there's Hebir Alvarado. My favorite game is Destiny, and so obviously I have some level of liking towards the art team there, because it is a very beautiful game, and his portfolio is also linked there. And so now I'm going to show you some examples of what you can do with ZBrush. And again, I want to remind you that these are professionals that are doing this. They've worked so long on these models. So please don't get demotivated by this, but rather inspired to see what you could potentially create in the future if you do choose to make it. And so this is Raf Grassetti. He was the one that did God of War, but some of his personal projects have included superhero art. So these, you can see the intricacies of the details, especially in like here on the left side, like the shoulder plate of that person. You can see like fine details in there. That's when you would need a high poly count to create those small details, because a large poly count or a low poly count will just run over those details and mask them out and smooth them. Here on the right side, it looks really cool, all the superheroes he's made. This is Hadir Karimi, or Karmi, and this is Will Smith. This is his model. And when I first saw his work, I was stunned, because this looks almost like a photo essentially. And then this is another person. You can actually see the process of him creating himself. This is Self-Portrait by Ian Spriggs. So if you let it run, it looks like an actual person. It's crazy. Just if this little video will restart, you can see that it starts from a very basic shape, and then you add more and more details as you go, until finally you get to something as amazing as the thing on the right. Here's our piece from Destiny by Javier Alvarado and the Bungie art team. And you can see that you can create game-ready assets really well. You can create detailed ones, and then using the tools such as Dynamesh and ZRemesher, you can make it so it's less impactful on your computer's system. And you can see here, while it is not as potent and clean looking on this model, it is in a game. And so you'd need something that is less demanding, but it's still quite incredible to look at. Here, it's another art piece from a person called Kevin Cassidy. He makes like monsters and things like that. Just looking at this, it's really incredible to see the creativity that has to go into this, and the sheer effort that you have to put in this to get something that looks so realistic and nice. There's another piece of his art. It's called Titan. And you can check it out all on his portfolio page, which I've linked before. Here's another person. It's called Withered. It's by C Tang. He's a really powerful artist. a 3D artist in I think China, and so he makes some great models there. And so just looking at this, it's incredible to see what some people can do.